I should maybe mention Kerry recently wrote this fascinating book called Gratitude in Education. And she's exploring some of those ideas, and the best thing about the book are the stories. So another story that came to mind was this teacher Adam, and how he dealt with the kind of ongoing difficult situation. I think it nicely demonstrates what you just said. So can you just tell us the story? Yeah.
Yes. So Adam was one of my pre-service teachers, and what they had to do in first semester was go off to once a week to go off to this one school and come back into class and report about what they'd experienced. And Adam had this colleague teacher called Bill, who constantly complained about these 3 so-called ratbag boys. And these boys kept, Bill warned Adam that these boys are going to really muck up and they're going to be really misbehaving and sort of going all over the place. And he sort of rattled off a list of bad things that are going to happen if these boys don't behave. And sure enough, Adam observed these boys class after class, and they were very misbehaving and really sort of outrageous. And then Adam came to the end of the day where they had Year 8 maths class, and he was kind of thinking, oh no, what are they going to be like now? But then as these boys walked towards this teacher called Sophie's class, he noticed that Adam's he noticed that they were really they'd really changed, and that they were really different in Sophie's class. And he noticed that Sophie at the beginning of the class kept on thanking them for coming. And all the way through the class, Sophie kept on saying, thank you so much for what you've been doing. And these boys were completely calm in comparison to all the other classes that they've been to all the way through. And at the end of the class, Adam asked Sophie what was happening there. And Sophie said, I just really appreciate the fact, given I know that their home life, I really appreciate the fact that they've actually got out of bed and come to class. So it was Sophie's innermost attitude of gratitude towards these boys that really helped them be engaged and helped them pay attention. So that's a really good example, I think, of the innermost attitude of the teacher and the impact that has on the students, because they were really outrageous all the way through the day, but as soon as they hit a teacher who was really valuing them and thanking them, it really changed. Yeah.
That's a really powerful concept, that we kind of go beyond what, this is our role as a teacher and this is what we expect from the students. And basically, if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, well, it's their problem. And it actually reminds me of this quote from your book by, I think, Rachel Carson about, I'm not sure if I can find it now, underneath the most annoying behavior is a frustrated person who's crying out for compassion. I mean, I think it's quite powerful when you realize that, whatever bad behavior there might be from someone, it may be, they might just need help, and the teacher can go a long way in offering the help. So, you're talking about all this presence, but I'm just trying to relate it to all these trends in education that we're seeing, things like online learning. How do you get the teacher's presence in an online learning environment where you're just sitting in front of the computer and there's no one to...
No one to talk to. Yeah, I think it's a very complex question, but I would really probably answer that in terms of how we got to online teaching in the first place. I think that there's a real place for online teaching, but not to replace the role of the teacher. And I think that there is a lot of teaching that does go on online, but the reason why we could even contemplate online teaching was because the presence of the teacher wasn't considered to be a really fundamental part of teaching. It was really more about information and transfer of content instead of all these other things that I'm talking about, which is the innermost attitude of the teacher and the presence of the teacher having a really big impact on the student. And so because we didn't value that, it was so easy to just transfer this kind of whole notion of teaching equals transfer of information onto online teaching. But I think we've lost a lot. And I think the other thing is about my concept of gratitude is that whatever we don't value in education, we lose. So we didn't value the teacher enough, or we didn't value that aspect of teaching. So because we didn't show our gratitude and our appreciation for it publicly, we lost it.
So how do we value the teachers? There's all these all this debate about compensation, teacher compensation. Should we try to attract them through better compensation schemes and reward the more quality teacher better? Or what's the key thing that would attract good quality teachers and would be happy to stay and contribute to our kids' learning?
Well, I think that most of the teachers that I've worked with, and the research is bearing this out as well, is that what really matters for teachers is relationships, and really good quality relationships rely on them being valued, and that there's a culture of value and appreciation in the school. So if you go into a school or a university where your dean or your principal really values you and knows how to express that value, then that's a really good school. And you can really tell just from the moment you meet the principal of a school, the kind of quality of the school is all going to flow down from the attitude of that principal.
I mean, you've been to many.
I really believe that. That's in the work that I do, I spend a lot of time, first of all, working with school leaders and then teachers and then students. So I start with the kind of leadership first. And so I think teachers really need to feel valued, and they need to have an opportunity to have really good quality relationships. And there's so much more of an emphasis on busyness and getting tasks done and meeting performance objectives that the relationship gets lost. And because of that, there's just not enough of that sort of quality relationship or connection between students and teachers or teachers and teachers. So sometimes there's sort of feeling that it's so robotic or so much high pressure and so busy that we forget, as teachers, we forget that that connection between another human being is really important. Yeah.
So are you saying that that's kind of more valuable to the teachers than the financial?
Yeah, I think...
You're talking to an economist. You need to convince me.
Well, there's teachers in the audience, you should ask them.
What do you guys
But I think, I mean, of course we have to be paid enough, but it's not enough, I don't think. What do you think?
Are there relationships, is it a point that you would agree with?
I think it's not a coincidence that there are very high numbers of academic staff are leaving universities, and that correlates also with widespread literature on the fact that collegiality is fading in universities everywhere because there's not enough time.
That's right. Yeah, so there's my point.
That's great. Yeah. So let's think. I mean, I would agree very much with you that this, the attitude of the teacher as well as the student has a big impact on the learning outcomes. Let's explore some of those other strategies or some of the other problems that you find are stopping students from learning effectively. I should actually say that we met a long time ago when I was doing my PhD at University of New South Wales, and Kerry was, I was very lucky to be able to be a part of a process where we were designing and implementing these transition workshops for kind of first-year students. Yes. Can you tell a little bit about that? Just what they were about. What was the idea?
Well, I think that the first thing was about the awake student, wasn't it, still right back then? And there's kind of like physical strategies that we can teach them just about, drinking more water, because water is really important. So water and nutrition and posture, putting our backs up straight against the chair, because the oxygen, yes, everybody in the audience, I'm noticing, our oxygen goes from our backbones to our heads, and so into our brains, and so therefore posture is really important. And these little things seem to be sort of so trivial, but if students are trying to study and they're dehydrated, they're not going to be able to be awake enough. So there's kind of like the basic things, but there's also sort of strategies in regards to overcoming some of the really kind of common issues, which is around procrastination, for example, and working out how to work out their time and learning strategies and things like that.
So what about procrastination?
Well, I think that there's a lot to be said about what emotional intelligence says about procrastination, which is that most of our decision making around what we're going to do is based on how we feel rather than a rational thinking process, because if it was a rational thinking process, we would just naturally do what we think we should do. But the thing that gets in the way all the time is our emotions. So the whole theory behind emotional intelligence is that we need to be intelligent about our emotions and use that productively. So focusing on what it's going to feel like at the end of the task, and really keeping that feeling in the present moment. So, for example, you have to do an essay and you ask yourself, do I feel like doing it? And you often say, no, I don't feel like doing it. I feel like going out with my friends. And so therefore you go out with your friends, because I can see some students going, yeah, yeah, in the audience.
So you shouldn't even ask the question.
You shouldn't even ask that question. Just focus on what it's going to feel like to complete that essay, or what it's going to feel like if I've given a couple of hours study. It's going to feel really good compared to going off with my friends. So focusing on the end result.
It depends on the
feeling.
amount of drinking that you do.
It does. It really depends on it.
Well, I think I should apply it to vacuuming. You know, it's my least favorite activity. But maybe if I focus on the, you know, on how nice and clean it'll all look, and how satisfied my wife will be.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly how the principle works.
That'll help me to. Do I understand it correctly?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So what other issues? I remember we talked about big picture and detail in the transition workshop. So
yeah, that's one of the most fundamental learning strategies that my students keep coming back to as being the most important, because there's a lot around about learning strategies. But I think the one that really makes practical and very, very significant sense is working out whether or not you're a big picture person or a detail person, and to work out the gap between what the lecturer is expecting of you, or what the course is expecting of you, and your preferred way of orientating yourself. So say, for example, probably the audience has already noticed I'm a very big picture person, and you keep on having to ask me the details because my general orientation isn't towards the details. But I know as a good lecturer I need to focus on both the big picture and details so I can actually capture all my students. And so often there's a mistaken sort of idea that I'm not getting this subject, or I'm not good enough to study this at this university, or not good enough to study this subject. But it's not really that. It's more that there's this gap there between your preferred way of studying the information and the way it's being expected or taught to you. So kind of working out that gap is really important.
So what should a student do if there's a mismatch between what he needs, or he or she needs, and what the lecturer is providing?
Find it themselves. So if there's a lecturer who's really detailed, and in economics you wouldn't have this problem, I don't think, because it's sort of, I think there's something to be said about the kind of orientation of certain disciplines as well. But if you have a lecturer who is very, particular in giving lots and lots of details, but as a student you don't have the big picture and that's what you need, then you can either go and ask the lecturer for the big picture, or you can start looking for it yourself in terms of doing wider reading or asking questions about that kind of generates answers towards the big picture as well.
Okay. Surface versus deep approach. Can you? That was one of the other themes. Yes. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a very common way now in which, it sort of happened about over a decade ago, of ways in which we describe university learning and teaching, so that students who are studying just for information and only getting through and getting out are considered to be surface learners, and those who really study for the deep understanding of the subject matter so that they can really apply that to a future situation are considered to be deep approach learners. So we can actually help students to learn how to approach their studies in that way, in different ways.
Yeah, I find that the kids that are coming out of high schools, it's very much a surface learning. It's all memorizing, it's all rote learning. How do we change that? It's kind
change
of very
the system. Change what's expected of them in assessment, and change the pressure of having to kind of regurgitate information and all that sort of thing. Yeah, and make it enjoyable.